Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Alchemy spoilers. So, we've reached day 2 of spoiler season. I think it's only 3 days, because the set comes out on Thursday, so we're about halfway through the new set, and we've got a bunch of sweet cards to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking spicy new digital-only cards. Before we do, a couple of reminders. If you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers, you'll find them all over at MTGPreviews.com. You can sort them, you can filter them, all that good stuff. And if you need some physical Magic cards, you can get them from our amazing sponsor, Card Kingdom, by heading over to cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish and even get a free goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes, and they'll hook you up. So anyway, let's talk Alchemy. First up today, we got a pretty powerful red mythic in Forgeborn Phoenix, and I think this card in the right deck has potential to be pretty busted. 3 mana 2/2 Equipment Phoenix. It has flying. It gives the equipped creature flying. You can reconfigure it for just a single mana, which is huge, and then it says, whenever it or equipped creature dies, it perpetually gains. Whenever an equipped creature you control deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, return this card from your graveyard to battlefield. Tapped. I assume they meant the battlefield. Probably could have used a little bit more proofreading before they shipped this one out the door, but we know what they're trying to say with this card. So Forgeborn Phoenix, despite the little bit of a typo, I think is a really powerful effect, either played kind of by itself in an equipment deck, or if you build around it in a sacrifice deck, it can get really out of control. So it kind of compares to Phoenix of Ash or Lightning Phoenix. We've seen several 3-mana Phoenixes that can come back from the graveyard, and by itself, Forgeborn Phoenix can kind of do that. You're going to need some equipment in the deck, but if you play Forgeborn and your opponent kills it, and then you hit your opponent with an equipped creature, you're going to get it back. The biggest drawback is Forgeborn Phoenix doesn't have haste, and part of what made Phoenix of Ash and Lightning Phoenix pretty strong cards in like mono red aggro style decks is that haste ability, coming back from the graveyard to smash your opponent immediately. Forgeborn Phoenix doesn't do that. It's a much slower version, which I think means in like mono red aggro or something, you're probably not going to play it. However, there are a couple places where this will shine. One is in an equipment style deck. Thanks to Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we got a bunch of reconfigure creatures. So they're creatures that can also turn into equipment. Forgeborn Phoenix seems perfect for a deck like that, because you can play a whole bunch of equipment but still have enough creatures to make your curve work. And then Forgeborn Phoenix is a way to protect your stuff. It synergizes with Ogre Head Helm because that sacrifices then you get your stuff back. So there's a lot of shenanigans here. So in some sort of equipment based deck, I think Forgeborn Phoenix is kind of an all-star. Maybe even more exciting is a sacrifice style deck. In Alchemy, you got like Eye Twitches and Shambling Gas. Imagine like just moving your Forgeborn Phoenix onto Eye Twitch, sacrificing it, and then for the rest of the game, whenever you hit your opponent with an equipped creature, which can be the Forgeborn Phoenix equipped for 1 mana thanks to reconfigure, you're gonna get that Eye Twitch back, so you can sack it again and again and again. And this gets even easier in Historic, where we get free sacrifice outlets like Yawgmoth Thran Physician or Woe Strider. Imagine putting this in like a Yawgmoth deck, moving it to a creature, sacrificing it to Yawg, moving it to the next creature. It's just 1 mana to reconfigure, sacrificing it to Yawg, and then after you sacrifice your board, you put your Forgeborn Phoenix maybe on your Yawgmoth, give it flying, hit your opponent, get everything back, do it again. You might need to add a couple more equipment to the deck, but even there I'm not sure. Maybe Forgeborn Phoenix by itself would just be enough for a deck like this. And then the upside is huge, because you can sacrifice those creatures every single turn and get them back, which is an insane amount of value with something like Yawgmoth, or throw a Blood Artist into the mix, because it's giving the creatures that ability perpetually. So once you do it one time, you put it on a creature, sacrifice it one time, for the rest of the game, it's going to come back every single turn. Seems pretty absurd. So Forgeborn Phoenix, I think the card's really powerful. I don't think I'd play it in just like mono red aggro, but in an equipment deck or a sacrifice deck, this feels like one of the strongest cards we've seen in this new release of Alchemy. We also got Soul Servitude, a new 3 mana edict, instant speed, 3 mana, target player sacks a non-token creature. When they do, you may discard a card. If you do, conjure a duplicate of the sack creature into your hand, and you can cast it with mana of any color. So this is essentially a twist on like a Soul Shatter, let's say. The downside is, you are going to get your opponent's worst creature. Well, worst non-token creature. Being non-token is a bit of protection. Your opponent can't just sack a random 1/1 token, but you are going to get their worst creature. The upside is you can kind of loot that creature into your hand. If you got an extra land or a dead removal spell or something, you can discard it and get a copy of that creature. We'll have to see. Soul Shatter always gets your opponent's best creature, and even that hasn't really been seeing much play in Alchemy or in Historic, so the same might be true of Soul Servitude. It's also worth mentioning that because you got to discard a card, you're not really getting a 2-for-1 out of this. It's still trading even in cards. Like, you spend the Soul Servitude, your opponent loses a creature, you lose a card that you discard, you get a copy of that creature. So we'll have to wait and see. The problem with a card like this is, as I mentioned before, you're always going to get your opponent's worst creature. So a lot of times this is going to get a random 1-drop, a Hopeful Initiate or something, which you might not even want to discard to get if your opponent's sacrificing something that's pretty underpowered, not good with your deck. On the other hand, there's going to be times when you snake a Goldspan Dragon, and this card's going to be absurd, so we'll have to wait and see. I feel like since Soul Shatter is not seeing a ton of play, and the upside of getting rid of your opponent's biggest thing is a meaningful one, this might not really see a ton of play, but it is a cool design. These weird Conjure Theft cards, I think they're fun cards to play with, even though I don't expect this one to make a huge impact on the meta. Maybe it's a sideboard card, but probably not a main deck card at the moment. We also got another Intensity card in Runaway Growth. So 4 mana enchantment, it enchants a land, its starting intensity is 1, and it says when enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional amount of green mana equal to its intensity, then perpetually increase its intensity by 1. So if you think about how this card works, you play it for 4 mana, the first time you tap it for mana, you're going to add an extra green mana. So you tap your forest, you get 1 mana, and then 1 more from Runaway Growth, and then you up the intensity, so then the next time you tap it, you're going to get 2 extra mana, so 3 total, then 4, then 5, so it does snowball relatively quickly. It is a little bit slow starting out. Some people have compared it to Empowered Auto Generator, which I think really is kind of the paper version of this. I mean, obviously the difference is it's an artifact, it doesn't go on a land, but it's still a 4 mana thing that grows. As you tap it, you get charge counters and get more mana for it, so this is kind of the weird digital-only version of that. I guess Perpetually kind of could matter. You play it and, like, get some intensity on it, and your opponent blows it up, and then you reanimate it or something. Although it seems unlikely that the intensity on this card is going to be much different than a charge counter on Empowered Generator. So is this card good? I don't think in a generic sense. So if you look at other similar cards, Wolf of Haven, that's the best of the bunch. That sees play back to Historic and Enchantress style decks. 2 mana, makes the land tap for 1 extra mana. Then in Alchemy, we got like Find a Path, Glittering Frost, essentially 3 mana versions of this, but none of them have the upside of making more mana as the game goes along. So that's kind of the power of Runaway Growth. Like, if you're expecting the game to go long, this can get really out of control. Your land can be tapping for a ton of mana each turn. When these other versions are only ever adding 1 extra mana, the downside of Runaway Growth is it is pretty slow. Like, if you want to make mana with it right away, you gotta get up to 5 mana, 4 mana, and then you gotta have an untapped land to put this on, then you can tap it for 2 mana and start getting intensity. If you play it on turn 4, you're putting on a tap land, and then you're not getting the first intensity counter, I guess, even though it's not technically a counter, until the next turn. So I think this is a card that wouldn't just go in a generic deck, but in the right deck, like a deck that can untap the land that it's on, this card can be incredibly powerful. So I'm thinking like Teferi Slows the Sunset, Sculptor of Winter, put it on a Snowland, or Sereth the Viper's Fang. Like, imagine this. You play your Runaway Growth, you tap it for mana, you get the second intensity counter, so you're making 2 mana right away. Then you untap it with a Teferi, you can tap it again, you're going to get 2 extra mana, and then you're also going to get up to the 3rd intensity counter, because remember, it doesn't add on your upkeep or once per turn. Every time the land becomes tapped, it's making an extra mana. So if you can build a deck that is constantly tapping and untapping this land, it can get out of control really, really quick and just ramp you into the biggest things possible. So that's what I'm thinking with this card. And just a generic ramp deck, I feel like it might be too slow, but in a deck built to untap the land that it's enchanting, this card's going to be really strong. We also got Undercity Plunder, and I kind of like this card. 2 mana sorcery, says target player discards a card, and then they may discard discard an additional card. If they don't, conjure a duplicate of a random card from their library into your hand. It perpetually gains. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast this. So if you think about this, this is either a Wrench Mind, essentially, where 2 mana your opponent discards 2, or it's like a weird twist on a Bad Deal. Bad Deal is a ridiculous amount of mana, which makes it pretty much unplayable, but the other option is your opponent discards 1 and you draw 1. What this means is, no matter what, this is going to be a 2-for-1 for 2 mana, which is a really powerful effect. Like, 2-for-1s are just inherently powerful. You're going up a card on your opponent, and no matter what your opponent chooses, you're going to be getting a 2-for-1 out of this. I will say, the ability of conjuring a card from their library is a little weird. It doesn't even say, like, non-land card, so maybe, like, what, 35-40% of the time, this is going to be your opponent discards a card, and you get a random land from their deck. Sometimes it's going to be something better, but it is completely random, so you never really know how valuable the card you're going to get from your opponent's deck is. So we'll have to wait and see just how strong this is. Wrench Mind sees play all the way back to Modern and discard decks, and I think at a minimum, this is an all-star for discard decks. If you're building Turgid in Alchemy, or you're building Tiny Bones, or Waste Not in Historic, I think this is awesome. Like, this is exactly what you want in this deck. If your opponent discards 2, that's great, you're winning. If they discard 1 and you get another card, well, you're still getting triggers for your Waste Not, and, you know, getting your Tiny Bones active, and Turgid stealing stuff, plus you're getting a bonus card out of the deal. So in discard, this is definitely an auto-include. It might even be good enough just in generic decks, though. We've seen Go Blank as an upgraded Mind Rot become a really heavily played card. Sure, it exiles the graveyard, which is a big upside, but Undercity Plunder has its own upside of potentially stealing you a good card from your opponent's deck. So as a 2-mana 2-for-1, then maybe this is just a fine mid-range card, or a hoser against control decks. So I really like Undercity Plunder. I think this might be one of the stronger cards we've seen from this Alchemy release. Definitely an all-star for discard decks in Alchemy or in Historic, and might see some play in the sideboard in a minimum in other, like, mid-range decks as well. Next up, we have what I think is just the strongest overall card, period, bar none, from this Alchemy release, at least so far, Futurist Spellthief. So Futurist Spellthief, 3 mana, 3/2, Moonfolk Wizard with Flash. When it enters the battlefield, conjure a duplicate of target spell into your hand. That card perpetually gains. You may spend mana as though it was mana of any color to cast this spell. This card is absolutely bonkers. So 3 mana, 3/2 Flash, that's already a great baseline. And then this is going to essentially draw you a card. As long as you play this with something on the stack, you're going to draw a copy of that card, and there's no restrictions on this. You can use it to get a copy of one of your own spells if you want to. If you have enough mana to cast a spell and then cast this while it's still in the stack, you can get a copy of that. You can steal your opponent's stuff. And this isn't just instant or sorcery spells. This is any spell. So you can be stealing artifacts and planeswalkers and enchantments along with instants and sorceries. So this card just screams value at a good baseline. If you think about it, this is like a mega upgraded Rogue Refiner. Like, the floor of this is a 3 mana 3/2 Flash that draws you a card when it enters the battlefield. That by itself is a really, really strong effect. When you think about these stats, there's a pretty long history of 3 mana 3/2 Flashes being kind of bonkers. Look at Opposition Agent, look at Hull Breacher, because these stats are good enough to be a good creature on its own. Like, a 3/2 Flash is good enough, you can flash it in and block something, maybe trade, maybe even eat a 1-power attacker, and then you also get the upside of this really, really powerful ability. And one of the big upsides of Futurist Spellthief is you're gonna get that ability right away. Like, sure, Opposition Agent, Hull Breacher, you can flash them in response to something and get the value right away as well. Futurist Spellthief is gonna do the same thing, though. You cast it with something on the stack, and you're gonna get a copy of that effect. So I think the floor on this card is really high, and then the ceiling's also pretty high too. Plus, it's a wizard, so you can double it up with Harmonic Prodigy if you want to. You can play in Panharmonicon style decks. I don't think you need to do this to make the card good. I think the card is just more than good enough. It's a standalone threat in a bunch of different decks, but if you do want to build around it, there are synergies. If you get back to Historic, maybe there could be a straight up Flash deck, and again, I don't think you got to build around this. You can just play this as a good card for value in a bunch of different decks, but if you're playing a straight up Flash deck, you have this to go along with your, like, Slither Wisp, you got Brazen Bar, you got Spectral Adversary, so I could see a Dimir or a mono blue Flash deck developing. I think this card's great. Futurist Spellthief, I feel like this is an all-star. I think we're going to see a lot of this. It's got good stats. It's got good abilities. It generates value right away. It is just a really, really pushed card. We also got Inchblade Companion, a pretty interesting new reconfigure 1-drop. So 1 mana 1/1, Equipment Insect. Gives equipped creature +1/+1. You can reconfigure for 2, and it says whenever Inchblade Companion becomes attached to a creature, create a token that's a copy of Inchblade Companion, except it doesn't have this ability, and it only triggers once each turn. So essentially, you get a 1 mana 1/1, and then you can move it to a creature, and you get another version of it, Inchblade Companion, as a bonus. So you get another 1 mana 1/1. My main question for this card is honestly, what about this makes it digitally exclusive? Like, why couldn't this just be a paper card? If you think about it, we got Bloodforged Battle Axe as an equipment that makes more copies of itself, and then we've had cloning effects like Progenitor Mimic in the past that make copies, except the copies don't get the ability. So I'm not sure what about this needs to be digital only. Like, I feel like you could have just printed this in a commander deck or something and it would work. Yeah, but what am I missing? Am I missing something in the rules that makes this digital only and not work in paper? Definitely let me know, but I'm confused why they couldn't just print into this in a random commander deck or something in paper. As far as the card itself, it honestly reminds me the most of Usher of the Fallen as a white 1-drop that can make a 1/1 token each turn. You get a little bit of upside with Inchblade Companion in that 1/1 is actually an equipment that you can put on a creature, so you get a little bit of flexibility there. Although the downside is you do have to have something to attach it to. Usher of the Fallen, you play it on turn 1, attack with it, boast to make the token. Inchblade Companion, you gotta have another creature to move it onto to start making tokens, but as the game goes along, you can be getting one of these each turn for 2 mana, which is a relatively powerful effect. So level 1 could be good enough just for white aggro, which is a pretty popular deck in Alchemy in specific. Maybe this goes in the 1-drop slot just as a 1-drop that's good in the late game and offers some upside being an equipment. Other possibilities include playing it in an Equipment Matters deck where you just want a lot of equipment on the battlefield. Like we were talking about Forgeborn Phoenix wanting you to hit with equipped creatures. We got stuff like Helvar, which wants all your stuff to be equipped. We got Reckless Crew, which makes a bunch of dwarves where the number of equipment you control actually comes into play. So this could be a great option for decks like that. How powerful these decks will be, I'm still not sure. That remains to be seen, but I feel like this card definitely has a bit of potential. Another option is to take advantage of the fact that it's an artifact that can make more artifacts. We got stuff like Dragon Spark Reactor that just wants artifacts entering the battlefield. We got Oni Call Anvil that wants to be sacking artifacts. In some sort of weird sacrifice deck, this can just be making an artifact each turn to get more counters on your reactor, or get more sack fodder for Oni Called Anvil. So even though this looks like a 1 mana 1/1, I think there's actually a lot of synergy with this card, but I still wonder why they couldn't have just printed this one in paper. In the world of uncommons, we got Experimental Pilot, another 1 mana threat for a vehicle deck. So 1 mana 1/1, Ward 2, pay a blue, discard 2 cards, draft a card from its spellbook, and then it can crew vehicles, although its power was 2 greater, so it crews for 3 essentially. So what is this spellbook of Experimental Pilot? And the answer is, it's a whole bunch of vehicles. They're all kind of okay-ish. They all have crew costs that are low enough that it's going to be able to crew them. So this is potentially another powerful 1-drop for a vehicle deck. We've seen a few different takes on this lately. We got Hotshot Mechanic is a real card from Kamigawa proper, and then we saw Dragonfly Pilot yesterday, kind of the white version of this, a 1-drop that crews up and conjures a vehicle into its hand. Experimental Pilot, the downside is you're gonna have to discard cards. It's actually card disadvantage. You discard 2 and get 1 vehicle. The upside is it does have Ward, which is nice, and in a very certain build of vehicles, discarding cards can actually be an upside. So I think this card, I don't know if I'd play it over the white 1 mana crewers in a just generic vehicle deck. I feel like it might be a little bit worse. On the other hand, in a Greasefang deck or another deck that's looking to get artifacts back from the graveyard or anything back from the graveyard, discarding 2 cards can be an upside. Play this on turn 1, turn 2, discard 2 cards, get a random vehicle, have one of those cards be maybe a Parhelion, let's say if you're playing Historic. Turn 3, Greasefang, smash you, win the game, plus Experimental Pilot, gonna give you another vehicle that you can discard the next turn. Not a busted Parhelion vehicle, but still a reasonable vehicle. So I like Experimental Pilot a lot in Greasefang style vehicle reanimator decks. I think that's its home. In a normal deck, we probably got enough good options that we don't really need Experimental Pilot, but who knows? If you're in blue, it's a fine card. Getting rid of a couple extra lands to get a vehicle, even if it's kind of a mid-range vehicle, as far as its power level, is still perfectly fine. So anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Alchemy spoilers for today. So what do you think? How busted is the Phoenix? What do you think about these other cards? How good are they? Where are you going to play them? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.